Okay, let's dive deep into the material you've brought us. We're working primarily with insights drawn from Secret Doctrine, Volume 3, a source that really pulls back the curtain on some fascinating
It
areas.
really does. Ancient mysteries, religions, symbolism, the nature of reality itself.
Yeah.
It's all in there.
A huge range, and it connects traditions you might not expect, right? Hindu, Egyptian, Jewish, Christian, Greek.
Exactly. It suggests they're all part of this, well, older, maybe universal stream of knowledge.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to kind of navigate this complexity. We want to pull out the key insights, give you a shortcut, really, to understanding these pretty challenging ideas.
Yeah, without getting totally bogged down. And you'll find some surprising connections, maybe different takes on symbols or figures you thought you knew.
All right, let's start where the source does this idea of ancient wisdom being, well, secret,
Oh,
hidden,
yes, that's a major theme. That the core knowledge, especially when it terms magic or the occult arts, wasn't for public consumption. It was guarded.
guarded by who? We talking priests, mystics?
People like the Egyptian priests, yes, Hindu gymnosophists, Kabbalists, the Denaim, basically those initiated into these deeper understandings.
Okay, so why? Why all the secrecy? What was the big deal?
Well, the source lays out a few core reasons. First, it was considered sacred, profound stuff, not something to be thrown around lightly or desecrated by the profane, as the text puts it, people who wouldn't get it or respect it.
Makes sense. And then there's the danger aspect.
Oh, absolutely. A huge concern about misuse. The text has this really vivid image. Sharing it freely would be like surrounding a group of children with explosive substances.
Wow. Okay, so potential for massive harm if it fell into the wrong hands.
Immense harm, abuse leading to destruction. That's why disciples' chelas had to be, sworn or pledged. They needed preparation and protection.
This really shifts how you might read old texts, doesn't it? The source makes a point about this, contrasting ancient secrecy with how modern scholars sometimes see, say, Plato's Timaeus.
Exactly. A modern scholar, like Professor Jowett has mentioned, might look at the difficult parts of Plato and think, well, it's obscure because science was in its infancy back then, or maybe it's just confusion.
But this source argues that's not it.
Not at all. It argues the ancient obscurity wasn't confusion, it was deliberate secrecy. They meant to veil the deeper truths.
And this connects to an even bigger idea, doesn't it? This concept of a primeval, maybe universal, one knowledge and one language.
Yes, fascinating idea. Like there was this original unified wisdom tradition way back.
Before Atlantis. The source mentions the submersion of the Atlanteans.
Right. It suggests maybe that original knowledge became esoteric, hidden after events like that. It even reinterprets the Tower of Babel myth, not so much about confusing languages, but about this universal wisdom becoming secret, limited because humanity wasn't ready for it anymore.
So it wasn't totally lost.
No, just became limited to the few, kept alive supposedly by initiates scattered across different cultures.
Which leads us straight into how they kept it alive, right? Symbolism, hidden
Yeah.
meanings.
Precisely. If you can't write things down plainly, you use symbols. The source really emphasizes this: don't take things literally, especially in texts like the Kabbalah or the Zohar.
It talks about vestments concealing the body.
Yeah, a great metaphor. The literal words are just the clothes. The real meaning, the body of truth, is underneath, always there, just veiled.
So symbols are the key. Let's take the sun. Huge symbol, obviously. But it's more than just the star, isn't it?
Much more. The source talks about a sun of initiation with a triple form, and it points to how ancient temples everywhere seem to face the sun. Memphis, Baalbek, the pyramids, round towers.
Evidence of some kind of universal ancient solar worship.
That's the argument. But not just worshiping the physical orb. It connects to ideas from thinkers like Philolaus, the Pythagoreans. The idea that our physical sun is like a mirror, reflecting a central spiritual sun.
Whoa, the cosmos reflecting deeper spiritual realities.
That's the essence of it.
Okay, another huge symbol, the cross. Where does the source trace that back to?
It points straight to the Egyptian Tau, that T-shaped cross.
Used in the mysteries.
Yeah, the Bacchic mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries. It's a powerful symbol there. Stood for dual generative power, eternal life. It was even seen as a kind of magic talisman.
And the claim is, this symbol found its way into Christianity.
That's the assertion. Via Gnostics and Kabbalists, maybe? And it points out the cross symbol appears way before Christianity. Assyrians, Egyptians, ancient Americans, Hindus, Romans.
So not originally Christian then.
According to this view, no. It was even used as a protective spell. The source links the signet of the living God in the Book of Revelation, the seal on the forehead, directly to this mystic Tao, calls it Signum Te.
That's quite a direct link from a core Christian image back to much older traditions.
The source presents these not as coincidences, but as echoes of that shared ancient symbolic language, from that original universal knowledge we talked about.
Okay.
Yes, especially in Pythagorean and Kabbalistic thought. The idea that ancient metaphysics wasn't just philosophical rambling, it was based on strictest mathematical principles.
But like a special kind of math. True mathematics.
Something deeper than just everyday arithmetic, yeah.
Yeah.
They saw names, for example, not just as labels, but as potent cosmo-astronomical symbols.
It gives the example of Abram and Brahma, right? Their names having a numerical link.
Exactly, showing how names themselves were thought to hold this mathematical symbolic code connected to the cosmos. It even mentions a key to the Hebrew-Egyptian mystery and links between ancient Egyptian and, believe it or not, Old British measurements through this numerical lens.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From symbols to the beings or forces involved, the Elohim in Genesis, how are they interpreted here?
Well, definitely not as a single god. The source reads Elohim as plural. 7 in number, it says, pre-extant creators.
And links them to, what, nature spirits, planets?
All of the above, potentially.
Yeah.
Nature powers, gods of constellations or planets. Figures like the Pitris in Hinduism, the patriarchs, it finds parallels everywhere.
Not just Hebrew, then.
Oh, no. It connects them to Gnostic figures, Jewish Kabbalah figures like Ildabaoth or Jehovah Jau, Phoenician deities, the 7 sons of Ta in Egypt, even figures in Native American and Assyrian lore.
And this changes the reading of Genesis 1.1.
Drastically. The Kabbalistic reading offered, based on the Hebrew, suggests something like, out of the ever-existing essence, the dual or androgen force gods shaped the double heaven. So the Elohim become this active, maybe even male-female divine force shaping creation.
Interesting. What about the Kabiri? They're called mystery gods.
Yeah, the name itself implies great or powerful. They're described as really high-level beings, highest planetary spirits, greatest gods, often linked with the planet Venus, worshipped at places like Hebron.
Connected to the host of heaven.
Yes, the Saba. And importantly, this source contrasts how the church later linked Venus's ruling angel, Aniel, with Lucifer, arguing that in the original mysteries, the Kabiri were these immensely powerful divine beings. It flat out says all the mystery gods were Kabiri.
Implying they were definitely not demonic figures.
Quite the opposite in this esoteric view.
And this idea of identifying figures across traditions. The source takes it even further with Christian angels, doesn't it? Saying they're basically pagan gods.
It makes that claim quite directly, yes.
Well, yeah.
Roman Catholic angels, archangels, cherubs. It equates them with the minor gods of the pagans, specifically the 7 planets, or figures from the east like the Dhyan Chohans or Kumaras, the mind-born sons of Brahma.
Giving specific examples, like Mars and Michael.
Exactly. Mars, the god of strength, maps to St. Michael, whose name means strength of God. Mercury, linked to knowledge, maps to Gabriel, linked to omniscience. Jupiter, associated with blessing, maps to Raphael, the angel of healing.
So the argument is,
It's just a change of names, the characters behind the masks remaining the same. It even views Jehovah as the synthesis of the 7 Elohim, the overall chief of the host, Saba, and potentially identical with Michael.
so familiar religious figures reinterpreted as ancient cosmic forces wearing new masks.
That's the essence of the argument presented, yeah, drawing heavily on esoteric symbolism and interpretations.
The material also briefly touches on bigger timescales, cycles, prophecies.
Right, things like calculating the Kali Yuga era, or the idea of the cyclic return of certain figures, like a divine child or virgin, placing these forces within vast cosmic timelines.
Okay, let's bring it down from the cosmic scale a bit. Practical magic. Occult practice. The source distinguishes theory from practice, right?
Very clearly. And it hammers home the dangers of the practical side if you're not prepared or guided. Turning it into sorcery is apparently quite easy. And evil thought suffices. Proper guidance, the right key, being fit. These are crucial.
It mentions sources for study, like the Zohar Hermetic texts.
It does list them: Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Enoch, Hermetic works, texts by alchemists and Rosicrucians, but immediately follows up with a huge warning.
Yes.
That for the unguided student, just reading these things can lead you down the wrong path towards black magic or sorcery. It suggests these texts often contain pitfalls, meant only for advanced students who have protection and guidance.
And how is black magic defined here?
As the evil result of misusing occult arts. It's judged by its effects, its outcomes. It talks about things like an invisible arrow or the evil eye, harmful psychic projections from a sorcerer, living or dead, that it claims can circulate in the world. Cites Egyptian texts like the Book of the Dead on this.
But there's a positive side mentioned too, theurgy.
Yes, theurgy. Associated with the Neoplatonists in Alexandria, like Ammoniasakas, and linked closely to Raja Yoga. The source calls this a lofty and sublime science, divine and exalted above all others. This is the high spiritual path of working with divine forces.
Okay. And what about Eastern traditions, like Tantra? It mentions texts like the Shivagama.
It does, but again with a major warning. It says reading these works indiscriminately can lead straight to most unmitigated black magic.
Why?
Because the line between what it calls white and black magic, distinguished by the object, the intention, and the agents or forces used, is apparently very, very thin.
Wow, that really puts a heavy emphasis on responsibility, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Intent, motive, ethical grounding.
Yeah.
They're presented as paramount when dealing with these kinds of energies or knowledge.
Okay, now let's look inward. The constitution of man. The source talks about 7 principles.
That's right. A kind of layered model of the human being, from the highest spiritual essence down to the physical. It lists them. Atma, the universal spirit. Buddhi, the spiritual soul. Higher Manas, spiritual mind or will. Lower Manas, the everyday thinking, rational mind, often linked to animal intellect. Kama, desires, passions. The astral body, or Linga Sharira. And finally, the physical body.
And something called the auric egg.
Yes, described as an invisible magnetic sphere surrounding us, connected to both our divine and physical aspects, and the source of our astral form. It also notes the Vedantic system uses a similar idea with 5 sheaths or koshas.
It also mentions energy centers, chakras.
Right, 7 main chakras located conceptually in the head area, but governing nerve plexuses throughout the body, and 42 minor plexuses. It links these to other groups of 7 in the body, like the 7 orifices.
Showing this kind of septenary pattern repeating through our constitution.
Exactly. A microcosm reflecting a macrocosmic pattern, perhaps.
Now, how does the ordinary mind, the lower manas, connect upwards to the spiritual parts, like buddhi manas?
Through something called antakarana. This is crucial. It's described as the bridge, the pathway, the necessary connection.
And there's a warning attached to this bridge, too.
A very serious one. The source warns against trying to destroy this bridge prematurely. Before you've really dealt with selfishness, purified the lower mind, and started to integrate it with the higher. Trying to force a leap is incredibly risky.
Risky how?
It could prevent you from ever reaching true spiritual wisdom, Gnana. Worse, it could actually sever your connection to your higher ego, your permanent spiritual self. It compares it to, well, destroying the bridge over a chasm before you've crossed.
So no shortcuts in inner development either.
It seems not. The source states it very plainly. No single rung of the ladder leading to knowledge can be skipped. You have to do the work, step by step.
What about consciousness itself, especially, say, after death?
The source presents consciousness, particularly disembodied consciousness, not just as an effect of the brain, but as a fundamental cause. And it describes it as inherently ubiquitous, potentially everywhere at once, not localized.
So for someone who's developed an initiate, what's their consciousness like after death?
It's said to become consciousness itself, pure awareness, no longer limited by physical senses or even space and time as we know them. It can perceive or reflect through subtler bodies, like the astral form, but without being stuck in one place. It compares this to the way consciousness seems non-localized in deep dreams.
The source also maps out different levels or states of consciousness, using terms like lokas and palas.
Yes, it lists various planes or states, often in groups of 7, making 14 total in some systems, like the Brahmanical Vedantic ones, Bur, Bhuvar, Swar, Mahar, Janar, Tapar, Satyaloka, and then the corresponding lower planes or talas.
And these aren't just places out there.
No, they're described primarily as states of consciousness through which man can pass. You can potentially access them even while on Earth, through inner development, via 7 paths and portals. But the highest states, the top 3, are only fully accessible and remembered by highly initiated adepts.
Okay, let's touch on avatars, sacrifice, and karma. Avatars first.
Right. Figures like Shankara, the great Indian philosopher, are presented as avatars incarnations of a divine principle like Shiva or the Logos itself, representing one of the primordial 7 rays of divine energy.
And the bodhisattva idea in Mahayana Buddhism.
The source explains this concept, where a highly evolved being manifests simultaneously on different planes. As a human being on Earth, as a bodhisattva in a subtle realm, the Rupa world, while their ultimate essence, the Dhyani Buddha, remains eternally in the highest spiritual realm.
This connects to the Nirmanakaya idea, the sacrifice.
Exactly. This is a really profound concept. A Nirmanakaya is the purified ego, the spiritual self of an adept, someone who could achieve full nirvana, complete liberation, but chooses not to. They sacrifice that final step.
Why would they do that?
Out of universal mercy and benevolence, they choose to remain connected to our sphere of existence, living a conscious life in a subtle, elusive shape, a Mayavik Rupa, to help humanity and guide evolution, working off their own residual karma in the process. A profound act of compassion.
The source also draws parallels between figures like Buddha and Jesus.
Yes, seeing them both as great reformers or saviors. It notes similarities in the kind of opposition they faced, and how followers later interpreted their teachings. It even mentions some older Talmudic claims linking Jesus to figures like Nibu, Mercury, or Buddha, suggesting they embody similar universal archetypes or roles.
And there's a deeper symbolic meaning of sacrifice, too, at the very foundation of the universe.
Right, a primeval and great sacrifice. This isn't about literal killing, but the symbolic idea that for the spiritual to manifest in the material world, there's a kind of dimming or smothering of spiritual in material.
It cites a specific text.
Yes, the Purusha Sukta from the Rig Veda, which describes the cosmic giant, Purusha, being symbolically dismembered or sacrificed for the different parts of the universe to come into being.
And this links to the sacrificial lamb symbol.
It does, through a fascinating bit of wordplay on the Sanskrit word Aja. Aja means unborn, referring to the eternal spirit, but it can also mean lamb. So the sacrifice of the unborn spirit into matter becomes symbolized by the lamb.
Suggesting the very existence of the material world is founded on this primordial sacrifice. Now, karma. What specific points does the source make about it, especially after death?
It offers a specific detail that the spiritual ego, the soul, after death, apparently revisits key scenes from its past life's actions.
Like a life review.
Sort of, but the purpose isn't punishment. It's for the ego to fully understand and recognize the justice of karma, the law of cause and effect, to help the law of retribution by acknowledging why things unfolded as they did.
Interesting. And there was a point about choosing when you die.
A curious one, yes. The idea that if someone, through spiritual will or perhaps occult means, intentionally puts off the body at a certain age, they might create a karmic tendency to die at that same age in a future life, possibly against their will next time around.
And what about sudden conversions? Can someone who's lived a life of evil just flip a switch?
The source is pretty blunt about this. It says that's not true. Someone powerful in evil, deeply entrenched in negative patterns, can at best use their current life to start neutralizing past bad karma.
Why not a complete turnaround?
The reasoning given is that the physical and subtle bodies become too defiled. The very molecules get set in a karmic direction. He uses a down-to-earth analogy. You cannot take a herring barrel and use it for a tar of roses. The ingrained patterns are too strong for an instant fix.
So change has to be gradual.
Yes, slow transformation. Trying to force a violent, sudden change, the source warns, could actually result in physical disease, madness, or even death. The system can't handle the shock.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the power of the word, specifically the sound AUM. It's mentioned as potentially protective.
Yes, the source suggests that sometimes the terrible death, which seems to mean the loss of connection to the higher soul, can be avoided by knowing the mysterious name, the word.
But it's not just about knowing the word AM, is it?
Definitely not. It clarifies it's a sound, and the real potency isn't in the letters, but in the rhythm or the accent, how it's vibrated or intoned. Just repeating it parrot-like achieves nothing.
So where does the real power come from?
The source is unequivocal. It requires being in thorough union with his higher ego. You need that deep inner connection to your own higher spiritual principles.
Without that connection.
Repeating the sound is useless. Worse, it could even have negative effects. The source warns that if you're not aligned with your higher triad, the sound could potentially be misused, even by negative forces, the brothers of the shadow.
So its protective power, like repelling negativity, the attack of the dragon Apophis mentioned, is conditional.
Entirely conditional.
Yeah.
It's only available if your own inner nature is fundamentally good and you are sincerely striving towards your higher self, which is that adium.
Through the higher ego and Buddhi?
Exactly. It says the higher ego is like the third letter, M, and Buddhi the second, U. It's the inner alignment and aspiration that unlocks the sound's true potential.
Well, that was quite a journey through this material. We've touched on so much: the secrecy of ancient wisdom, the multi-layered symbols like the sun and cross, these different views on divine beings, the complex structure of man, the paths and perils of occult practice.
It really paints a picture of interconnectedness, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Recurring themes of hidden knowledge needing to be earned, of looking beyond surfaces, of the universe and us being reflections of each other, and this long, often challenging journey of the soul.
Absolutely. And those constant warnings about secrecy, about the potential for misuse, the very thin line, it really drives home the idea that this kind of knowledge comes with, well, a heavy dose of responsibility.
It's definitely not presented as just intellectual curiosity. It's about inner transformation, ethical development, understanding your place in the grand scheme of things.
Which kind of loops back perfectly to that age-old maxim, doesn't it? The one echoed across so many traditions. Oh man, know thyself. When you hear these ideas about our seven principles, consciousness being ubiquitous, the links to cosmic forces,
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What does exploring all this ancient thought mean for you personally? How does it resonate with your own sense of self, your connection to everything else, and maybe the potential for growth that these sources hint at?
definitely a lot to ponder there. Food for thought as you continue your own explorations.